There was nothing but prairie and sky, the sun by day and the stars by night, and the cattle moving westward. If I live to be 1,000 years old, I shall not forget the wonder and the beauty of those big longhorns, the sun glinting on their horns, most of them 6 or 7 feet from tip to tip. Some that were like old Brindle, our lead steer, whose horns measured a fair 9 feet from point to point, and who stood near to 17 hands high. It was a sea of horns above the red-brown brindle and white splashed backs of the steers. They were big, wild, and fierce, and ready to fight anything that walked the earth. And we who rode their flanks or their drag, we loved and we hated them. We cussed and reviled them, but we moved them westward, toward what destination we knew not. Sometimes at night, when my horse walked a slow circle around the bedded herd, I'd look at the stars and think of Ma and wonder how things were at home. And sometimes I'd dream great dreams of a girl I'd know someday. Suddenly, something happened to me, and it happened to Orrin too. The world had burst wide open, and where our narrow valleys had been, our hog-backed ridges, our huddled towns and villages, there was now a world without end or limit. Where our world had been one of a few mountain valleys, it was now as wide as the earth itself, and wider. For where the land ended, there was sky, and no end at all to that. We saw no one. The plains were empty. No cattle had been before us, only the buffalo and war parties of Indians crossing. No trees, only the far and endless grass, always whispering its own soft stories. Here ran the antelope, and by night the coyotes called their plaintive songs to the silent stars. Mostly a man rode by himself, but sometimes I'd ride along with Tom Sunday or Cap Roundtree, and I learned about cattle from them. Sunday knew cows all right, but he was a sight better educated than the rest of us, although not one for showing it. Sometimes when we rode along, he would recite poetry or tell me stories from the history of ancient times, and it was mighty rich stuff. Those old Greeks he was talking about, they reminded me of mountain folk I'd known, and it fair made me ache to know how to read myself. Roundtree talked mighty little, but whatever he said made a sight of sense. He knew buffalo, although there was always something to learn about them. He was a mighty hard old man, rode as many hours as any of us, although he was a mighty lot older. I never did know how old he was, but those hard old gray eyes of his had looked on a sight of strange things. Man could make some money, Roundtree said one day. Over in the breaks of western Kansas and Colorado, lots of cows over there, belonging to nobody. Stuff drifted up from the Spanish settlements to the south. When Roundtree spoke up, it was because there was an idea behind it. Right then I figured something was stirring in that coot's skull, but nothing more was said at the time. Orrin and me, we talked it over. Each of us wanted a place of our own, and we wanted a place for Ma and the boys. A lot of cattle belonging to no man. It sounded good to us. It would take an outfit, Orrin said. Tom Sunday, I was sure, would be for it. From things he'd said on Night Herd, I knew he was an ambitious man, and he had plans for himself out west. Educated the way he was, there was no telling how far he would go. Time to time he talked a good deal about politics. Out west a man could be whatever he was man enough to be, and Tom Sunday was smart. Warren and me, I said to Roundtree, we've been talking about what you said about those wild cows. We discussed, the three of us, and maybe Tom Sunday, if you're willing and he wants to come in. Why now, that there's about what I had in mind. Fact is, I talked to Tom and he likes it. Mr. Belden drove his herd away from Kansas, Missouri border, right onto the grassy plains. He figured he let his cows graze until they were good and fat, and then sell them in Abilene. There were cattle buyers buying and shipping cattle from there because of the railroad. Anybody expecting Abilene to be a metropolis would have been some put out. But to Orrin and me, who had never seen anything bigger than Baxter Springs, it looks right smart of a town. Why, Abilene was quite a place, even if you did have to look mighty fast to see what was there. Main thing was that railroad. I had heard tell of railroads before, but it never come right up to one. Wasn't much to see. Just two rails of steel running off into the distance, bedded down on cross ties of hewn logs. There were some stock pens built there and about a dozen log houses. There was a saloon in a log house, and across the tracks there was a spanking new hotel, 3 stories high, and a porch along the side, fronting the rails. Folks had told me there was buildings that tall, but I never figured to see one. There was another hotel, too, a place called Bratton's, with 6 rooms to let. Each of the hotel, there was a saloon run by East of the hotel, there was a saloon run by a fat man called Jones. There was a stage station, that was 2 stories, a blacksmith shop, and the frontier store. At the drover's cottage, there was a woman cooking there, and some rooms were let, and there were 3, 4 cattle buyers loafing around. We bunched our cows on the grass outside of town, and Mr. Belden rode in to see if he could make a deal, although he didn't much like the look of things. Abilene was too new. It looked like a put-up job, and Kansas hadn't shown us no welcome signs up to now. Then Mr. Belden came back and derned if he hadn't hired several men to guard the herd so we could have a night in town. Not that she was much of a place, like I said, but we went in. Orrin and me rode down alongside the track, and Orrin was singing in that big, fine-sounding voice of his, and when we came abreast of the drover's cottage, there was a girl a-settin' on the porch. She had a kind of pale blonde hair, and skin like it never saw daylight, and blue eyes that made a man think she was the prettiest thing he ever did see. Only a second glance, and she reminded me somehow of a hammer-headed roan we used to have, the one with the one blue eye, a mighty ornery horse, too, narrow between the ears and eyes. On that second glance, I figured that blonde had more than a passing likeness to that bronc. But when she looked at Orrin, I knew we were in for trouble, for if ever I saw a man-catching look in a woman's eyes, it was hers, then. Orrin, I said, if you want to run a Maverick a few more years, and if you want to find that western land, then you stay off that porch. Boy, he put a big hand on my shoulder. Look at that yellow hair. Reminds me of that hammer-headed, no-account road we used to have. Pa, he used to say, size of a woman the way you would a horse, if you were a horse trade. And Orrin, you better remember that. Orrin laughed. Stand aside, youngster, he tells me, and watch how it's done. With that, Orrin rides right up to the porch, and standing up in his stirrups, he said, Howdy, ma'am. A mighty fine evening. Might I come up and set with you a spell? Mayhap he needed a shave and a bath like we all did, but there was something in him that always made a woman stop and look twice. Before she could answer, a tall man stepped out. Young man, he spoke mighty sharp, I will thank you not to annoy my daughter. She does not consort with hired hands. Orrin smiled that big, wide smile of his. Sorry, sir. I did not mean to offend. I was riding by, and such beauty, sir, such beauty deserves its tribute, sir. Then he flashed that girl a smile, then reined his horse around, and we rode on to the saloon. The saloon wasn't much, but it took little to please us. There was about 10 feet of bar, sawdust on the floor, and not more than a half dozen bottles behind the bar. There was a barrel of mighty poor whiskey. Any farmer back in our country could make better whiskey out of branch water and corn. But we had our drinks, and then Orrin and me hunted the barrels out back. Those days, in a lot of places a man might get to, barrels were the only place a man could bathe. You stripped off and got into a barrel, and somebody poured water over you, and then after soaping down and washing as best you could, you'd have more water to rinse off the soap, and you'd had yourself a bath. "You watch yourself," the saloon keeper warned. "Fellow out there yesterday shot himself a rattler while he was in the barrel." Orm bathed in one barrel, Tom Sunday in another, while I shaved in a piece of broken mirror tacked to the back of the wall of the saloon. When they finished bathing, I stripped off and got in the barrel, and Orrin and Tom, they took off. Just as I was wet all over, Reed Carney came out of the saloon. My gun was close by, but my shirt had fallen over it, and there was no chance to get a hand on it in a hurry. So there I was, naked as a jaybird, standing in a barrel, 2/3 full of water, and there was that trouble-hunting Reed Carney with 2 or 3 drinks under his belt and a grudge under his hat. It was my move, but it had to be the right move at the right time, and to reach for that gun would be the wrong thing to do. Somehow, I had to get out of that tub. There I was with soap all over me, in my hair, and on my face, and dribbling toward my eyes. The rinse water was in a bucket close to the barrel, so, acting mighty unconcerned, I reached down, picked it up, and sloshed it all over to me to wash off that soap. "Orrin," Carney said, grinning at me, "went to the hotel, and it don't seem hardly right, you in trouble, and him not here to stand in front of you." "Orrin handles his business. I handle mine." He walked up within 3 feet of the barrel, and there was something in his eyes I had not seen before. I knew that he meant to kill me. "I've been wondering about that. I'm curious to see if you can handle your own affairs without that big brother standing by to pull you out." The bucket was still about 1/3 full of water, and I lifted it to slosh it over me. There was a kind of nasty, wet look to his eye, and he took a step nearer. "I don't like you," he said, "and His hand dropped to his gun, and I let him have the rest of the water in the face. He jumped back, and I half jumped, half fell out of the barrel just as he blinked the water away and grabbed iron. His gun was coming up when the bucket's edge caught him alongside the skull, and I felt the whiff of that bullet pass my ear. But that bucket was oak, and it was heavy, and it laid him out cold. Inside the saloon there was a scramble of boots and a picking up of the flour sack towel I began drying off. But I was standing there right beside my gun, and I had the shirt pulled away from it, and it was easy to my hand it was. If any friends of Carney's wanted to call the tune, I was ready for the dance. The first man out was a tall blond man with a narrow, tough face and a twisted look to his mouth caused by an old scar. He wore his gun tied to his leg low down, the way some of those fancy gunmen wear them. And Cap Roundtree was only a step behind the right off, and he pulled over to one side and hung a hand near his own gun belt. And Tom Sunday fanned out on the other side. 2 others ranged up along the man with the scarred lip. "What happened?" "Carney here," I said. "Bought himself more than he could pay for." That blonde puncher had been ready to buy himself a piece of any fight there was left, and he was just squaring away when Cap Roundtree put in his 2 bits worth.